Okay, I want to describe how a model for communication, how I see communication as possible to visualize. Well, yeah, and some more comments at the end, I guess. So, firstly, when you say a term, it could have many multiple meanings. If you just say the word alone, it could mean any of the things, even that it sounds like. If you spell a word, then there's a different set of definitions. Now, each definition is a mode of that word, a way that that word can be understood. So when somebody speaks a word, there are multiple modes that are possible to interpret that word. Now, given in the context, some of those modes are masked out, and what word is being used. And some of the words in our language are just about this. This is what they're for. This is what we use them for. Like the word thing. Okay, if I say to my cousin, Jeff, get me that thing I bought you, and bring it over here, then he knows what the word thing means. It has a specific thing, whereas thing has this very broad potential mode. The context provides a subset. So when somebody says something, the context limits which modes might apply, but you could still consider that there's 3 to 5 modes that might apply in a given sentence. And on the listener or the perceiver side of this, they have the equivalent modes, but they're different because they're only the modes that that person knows. Okay, and so if the person that has spoken the sentence knows 3 or 5 of the modes, then any of those might be the meaning of that word, or even the speaker might be confused and not know which meaning applies, but at least he has the full space of all these potential meanings. But the perceiver may not have that meaning. Similarly, the perceiver might have a lot more meanings that he thinks are possible that aren't really possible. If he knew that person, he might be able to eliminate those. In the context of that person might eliminate some meanings of the word that that person was not aware of, if the perceiver knew that. So basically, whatever overlaps in these two sets is what is communicated. But of course, there's extra error in the communication if the perceiver, thinks certain possibilities aren't possible. When you speak really precisely, you're trying to arrange the context and the definitions such that the modes are singular. Often technical terms will be invented when some general term has these 5 different modes, and people, for a technical reason, want to talk about just one mode or one set of modes at a time. So that's how communication is working. But if you understand that model at all, you might also see how it's simplistic. So that's multimodal communication. What I really see this as well, but it's just an alternate tool because multimodal, communication is useful in understanding how you can communicate ideas with people. It has a practical value. But the problem is that these modes are like single definitions, and what's really happening is there's clusters of definitions that are really next to each other. And furthermore, they're not separated like points, they're just separated by space, and there's sort of a gradient. So each mode itself is like a little splash of color, or a spectrum. And the spectrum of a whole term is all the meanings. And there's gaps in the spectrum, dark spots where there is no light. And that's what separates these meanings of a word. Now, they could be very different meanings, meanings, or they can be related. If they're closely related, just shades of each other, then they're in one batch of this spectrum. And what we do is very similar. When we say a word, we put its spectrum up there with other words and masks the context. So we put up a certain subset of possible meanings. It's not just one meaning in a sentence. There's like an area of possible meanings, and that area of meanings is like a section of the spectra. The other person has an absorption spectra ability, or an ability to expect certain spectra as detectors for certain kind of spectra. Those are the modes that that person knows of that term. If there's light, basically from both of these, if these spectra overlap, then the part that overlaps is what is communicated. And this accommodates how definitions really work, because definitions aren't really point-like. They're blurry on the edges, and they have continuities, and the continuities can be really vast. The shades can go from one meaning all the way even to its opposite, like light and dark, black and white. There's shades all the way in between. And so that's how I see communication. Now, there's a couple things here that you could note. One is I've given two models, and this is part of how I see philosophy. I mean, we are creating tools. It's not that there's just one tool or one way to understand communication, but we could have many ways of thinking about it, and ought to. And the other thing I was going to say is that this is, when people tell me that they have trouble understanding me or I'm confusing, this is important. This idea I've just told you is key to how I interpret that. People are not ready to hear things in this kind of spectral way, where you present an idea knowing that it covers an area. Even in technical language. Now, I'm able to get an idea very precise. If we want to have it precise, get that spectrum really narrow. It's just one band. You can make it very precise, very point-like, and that's why multimodal communication also works, because if you're in technical language where you focus down your definitions tightly enough, then it applies pretty well, and you can. It's a good goal to make it so that it can apply in a technical discussion. But overall, you need to understand the gradients of a meaning, and a poet or an artist of words uses multiple meanings at once on purpose. They might write a sentence and it has 20 meanings, and maybe they're aware of each one of them, and they all convey some part of an idea that without them wouldn't be complete. So that's multimodal and spectral communication.